What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from the 10-7 MMA channel. And today's video is again related to this massive announcement that was made yesterday regarding the Paramount Plus deal. $7.7 billion is going to be paid to the UFC over 7 years. So that's $1.1 billion per year for the domestic rights to the content created and provided by the UFC. So that means Paramount Plus is now going to be the home of the UFC for all of their, I believe it's 43 events per year. And on top of that, CBS is also lumped into this equation. I think some people say the numbered events are going to be on CBS. I also heard in another statement that I think they're going to have 4 of the big events on CBS. I think the latter is the correct description of the partnership. So they're going to choose 4 events in particular. I guarantee you the White House card is going to be one of those where they're going to broadcast it out on CBS so that everybody can access the fights for free without even this paid subscription. But anyways, there's been a lot of debate and discussion about the deal. Is it a good deal from Paramount's perspective? Is it a good deal for the UFC, which it pretty much obviously is, unless you want to say that maybe Netflix would have been superior in terms of the larger subscriber base, 300 million versus 77.7 million or something is the figures that I researched. But the one thing that people are really unsure of is how is this going to translate to fighter pay? Obviously, this is something that people talk about all the time. Some people feel it's fair. Some people feel it's not fair. We haven't weighed in too much on this channel because I do think it's a much more complicated question than people give it credit. In terms of, I've noticed people try to do strict comparisons between the NFL and how they give 50% of the licensing revenue to the players, etc. And so and the UFC maybe seemingly gives none of that money to the fighters. But I think and I'm not saying fighter pay is perfect. I'm not saying it's messed up. I don't really know because I think it's a very complicated equation. The UFC, the way it's run, the way it's operated is very different than the NBA or the NFL, where you have an overall organization, but then each of the teams are sort of their own like commercial entities and they pay out the play. Like it's a totally different model. And I've also said this as well. And again, I don't know for sure, but the UFC is still growing. The sport of mixed martial arts is still spreading across the planet. So I've always assumed that the UFC probably has way more marketing costs, way more costs in terms of building the brand, building PI centers, doing all these other things to embed the sport in the country, in the US, as well as globally. So I think it's just a different formula. But anyways, this does raise some questions because in this specifically for champs, and I mentioned this in the video that I did yesterday, because champions, and this is a small subset of all the fighters, I know this, but champions usually get a cut of the pay-per-view buys, whether it's 1%, 2%, whatever the percentage. And in the past, when you had really big blockbuster fights, blockbuster events, that would be a pretty sizable amount of money. Pay-per-views are no longer there. What does that mean? How does that translate for fighter pay? It's a question that people are discussing a lot since yesterday. I wanted to highlight 2 big names in the sport from the reporting side or MMA YouTube side or whatever, and that's MMA Guru and Ariel Helwani. And I was listening to MMA Guru's video last night in particular on this entire deal, and it really it shocked me what he had to say. I was surprised because, and I'm going to show clips of previous clips of MMA Guru as well in this video, but it surprised me because his take, you can see in this quote right here. He said, fighter pay is the least of my worries. And I'm going to play the clip. It's a lengthy clip that I've selected. So I'm going to pause and chime in from time to time, but it was pretty crazy. And I'm going to also give an explanation as to why I think MMA Guru's tune has changed. And really a lot of the MMA YouTube tune has changed in regards to the UFC over the last couple of years. So we're going to talk about all that, how that may have influenced MMA Guru's opinion on this topic. I'm also going to contrast it with Ariel's perspective, which is specifically discussed in an interview today when he had Michael Chandler on the show. Okay, so this kind of blew my mind when I saw it, and I figured, all right, I want to cover it and I want to talk about it and dissect it a little bit more, because I don't think this necessarily means that MMA Guru is like anti-fighters by any means, but I do think it's relevant to showcase his position now, it's a pretty harsh stance, and talk about maybe why that has developed. So check this out. This is from his recent video that just came out last night.
Reporting here. And then this is the sentence I wanted to get into. Go get your money, fighters. Now, here's where I'm going to have something to say about this. And this is maybe going to be the realest fucking statement that anyone's going to have regarding the situation of the UFC selling to Paramount. How much the fighters are getting paid from this is the least of my fucking worries. I don't give a fuck anymore. I just really don't give a fuck anymore. The inactivity over the past few years, we know what happened when fighters started to get a little bit more cash, a little bit more freedom to choose and do what they want. So we can talk about how this affects people getting pay-per-view shares. Maybe we'll get into that in a second. But I don't know if they should be expecting people to immediately jump to a 30 for 30 contract when they were earning 12 for 12 before. That's the least of my concerns. I'm not going to be one of these guys that sits here and goes, well, what about the fighters? And what about how much are the fighters going to get out of this? I really don't care. I think they're overpaid already, and clearly, because most of them are sat out for years on end and being out hustled in the gym by literal fucking millionaires in Ilya Topuria and Arman Sarukian. Clearly, money is not the incentive in the sport, but the pay-per-view side of things is where things are going to get very interesting.
Okay, so let's pause here. So first of all, he's just basically talking about more entry-level fighters. Let's say right now they're getting 12 and 12 or 15 and 15. And he says, yes, should we be looking for a bump immediately to 20 and 20 or 30 and 30 with this additional revenue and all this extra profit that's probably going to come the UFC's way? And he's kind of drawing a hard line in the sand, which I'm pretty surprised by. I'm going to show you why in a second after we finish this clip and move on to the next one, because he had a very different perspective a little over a year ago. But that's his take. And I was thinking about why he's coming at it this way. It almost feels a little bit aggressive. And I guess this isn't just MMA Guru. This is a lot of folks in the MMA YouTube community. And again, I don't really feel this way, but I'm not as dialed into the sport as somebody like MMA Guru or MMA Joey. But a lot of folks have been venting a lot of frustration in terms of maybe the diminishing quality of some of the cards, which I don't feel like the quality has really even diminished that much. I'm not even like, I feel like we've got all these awesome main events for the next 4 numbered events. I think there's going to be another great one that's going to be announced pretty soon. We still are waiting for Islam versus JDM to be announced, but people are pretty sure it's going to happen in November. There's rumors that Ilya maybe versus Gaethje is going to happen in December, which I think is going to be cool. I'm excited for that. But anyways, there's this growing level of frustration, and I think that's what's influencing him to say that right there. Now, I also wonder, is this something that MMA Guru really feels, or is this just something he was saying in the moment, just feeling some emotions or feeling some frustration, and he said this? I kind of am leaning more towards that side. But anyways, I was pretty shocked to see him take this stance. And again, I'm going to show you specifically why in a second, because we're going to do a rewind back to a video that MMA Guru made, like I said, a little over a year ago. But anyways, now we're going to get into the pay-per-view discussion, because that is an interesting thing that we should recognize for a lot of the champs that are usually, even though the pay-per-view numbers are dwindling, and you usually have to hit a cutoff of a certain amount of pay-per-view sales before you start getting that percentage starts kicking in. So for a lot of champs, they may not have even been hitting that because of all the piracy or whatnot. So the pay-per-view drip money may have been inconsequential. But anyways, he talks about that right here and gives his take on how he thinks this is going to unfold. Check it out.
What the fuck are these guys going to do now? Because a lot of them have signed deals, multi-fight deals, especially the champions and the big names that aren't champions, like maybe in Israel Adesanya right now, or some of the others. A lot of these guys have signed deals where a pay-per-view share is a large reason as to why their deal is good. Like, you might see some of these guys, and this is what the Twitter pages always post. Oh, so-and-so made 1 million for this fight. And I'm like, dude, no, he didn't. He lives in a grand mansion, one of 5 that he owns. He didn't make 1 million. That's his show money. He gets like 5% of the pay-per-view share. So that would be like a large bulk of their money. You hear DC talking about this all the time, how he's still cashing checks from certain things. Even Uriah Faber from back in the day when he used to be on pay-per-views, he was famously on the McGregor, not famously for this, but this is where he said this famously. He was on McGregor's Tough season, McGregor Faber Tough, and he was talking about how he still gets money from one of his old title fights on pay-per-view. So a lot of money gets through, and McGregor was saying, rightfully so, you get your money dripped. You should only get your money when we feel like paying you, yeah?
So anyways, I just want to interject real quick. It's a good point that he brings up in terms of the money that Uriah Faber used to get, or DC or whatnot. But there's an important thing that we have to bear in mind, is that pay-per-view sales and the numbers have been going down steadily. I think not because the fan base is dwindling. I think it's quite the opposite, but it's because of piracy. He actually talks about that later in this video. I didn't include that section, but he talks about those streaming services that allow people to rip these streams and steal the events, essentially. And I think we need to bear this in mind. While the pay-per-view discussion is something that we should discuss, but I think we need a little bit more information, because I wonder if all those numbers have dropped off substantially. So maybe now that they have this set amount that's come in, if you do the math, whatever, divide the 1.1 billion per year divided by 43. I can't remember. I think somebody said like it ends up being like 25 or 30 million per show or something like that. Now you can almost look at that as a replacement for the pay-per-views and whatnot, and then start to divvy that money up and maybe give some sort of a percentage base share to champions or whatnot. And I think they're going to end up making more, only because, as I mentioned, I believe that the pay-per-views have been really severely impacted compared to like the McGregor Habib days, etc.
And that's kind of what's going on here. But I feel like it's just going to be a flat. This actually might look better for the UFC. And don't let them famous you. Big announcement, actually. This needs to be made, because I know this is going to happen. Don't let them famous you. The show money, the purses that are published to the public, will now be way higher than they were before. But the actual payment may be lower. Even though the purse money, which is what's going to be revealed and what is revealed, is going to be way higher. They didn't used to show how much people made with the pay-per-view percentage. Now they're probably going to show everything, and it's going to seem crazy. Like, oh my God, he's making 5 million, this guy in a title fight. But just know that there's a little asterisk to that. But this overall is good. The cost is good. Ariel's weighed in on this. He was saying, while most fans are celebrating the death of pay-per-view, and rightfully so, it'll be interesting to see how UFC handles champions with pay-per-view. Exactly. X number of viewers. Fascinating. Yeah, how are they going to measure that? If they don't do pay-per-views anymore, how are they going to measure that, right? They may just look at social media interactions and how many people are live during the fight. And
all right, so we're going to end it there. I think there's like a few more seconds that I selected, but that's pretty much the point. So I want to say two things in response to what he said about, one, the UFC famoosing the fans and making them think that all of a sudden salaries have gone up when in fact they haven't. That is an interesting question, specifically for the champs, in terms of, hey, now is the extra bonus money or the base salary, is that gone up to in excess of what they were getting from the pay-per-view percentages? And again, that's only a small fraction of the fighters, but it's a worthwhile question to ask. I think the truth will be revealed from the fighters themselves. I don't think most of the fighters will talk about it, but I'm sure a handful will actually say, yes, things are substantially better now. I think we'll get the honest answer at some point in 2026. The other thing is, when he's talking about, hey, how are they going to determine this? Are they going to look at social media numbers and whatnot? I was actually thinking about this. I think it should be pretty easy, because what you could do is, I'm guarantee you they can, obviously, just like they can look at concurrent live streamers, and also they can look at how many people are watching it back after the fact, right? So people maybe miss the live event, but they come back and watch. I guarantee you, just like on YouTube, you can look at the sections of, it has to be the case. They have to have these numbers. You could probably look at the portions of the pay-per-view that were most replayed, and then you could base some sort of a percentage distribution of the streams. That could translate to the relative amount of money or the bonuses they could pay out to the fighters. I mean, in fact, that's actually a great way to do it if you think about it, because they're already getting this money up front. And then maybe even there might be superstar breakouts on the prelims that maybe weren't having specific bonuses. Now they could say, all right, all this money is coming in now to really see who's driving the viewership. Let's look at the peak view time. Oh, wow, it peaked at this fight on the prelims. It's only fair that this fighter now is going to get a certain percentage or whatnot. So in a lot of ways, this could be a better meritocracy-based system if they simply look at that. And I guarantee you those stats and those metrics are going to be easily accessible. Now, going back to MMA Guru's first statement, fighter pay is the least of my worries. It is interesting because we're going to take a look at an old clip of the MMA Guru where, if you guys remember, almost a year and a half ago or whatever, he wanted to be part of the solution to fix this fighter pay issue for a lot of new fighters, for debut fighters. So it's very interesting. He seems to have changed his tune, but I just want to highlight that. And again, I think the reason why is because he, like a lot of other folks in the MMA YouTube community, are feeling frustration. But just to show that contrast, here's the clip in case you don't remember what he said some time ago.
For many, many years, massive MMA media members with giant platforms and fan bases that make loads and loads of money have really had a problem with UFC fighter pay.
He's talking about Ariel Helwani. I guarantee it, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious.
And how low it is for certain UFC fighters. Now, to help this situation, these massively known MMA media members with massive fan bases and massive salaries have tried everything they could to help fighter pay in the UFC. I mean, they've cried about it on Twitter. They've cried about it on Instagram. They've even cried about it on YouTube as well. They've exhausted all of their options, it seems. They've tried everything. No, I'm joking. All they've done is cry and moan and complain. And when I grew up, I was taught that if you want something done, you do it yourself and you take action. So I'm rolling up my sleeves. I want to fix UFC fighter pay. And I think MMA YouTube can do it because we take action. We don't just cry about things and do nothing. Okay? I have a problem with UFC fighter pay at the very lowest level of the sport. And that is the level that I wish to tackle first. Okay? I'm not out here going to use Ngannou as a big name in a big topic and a big discussion to start talking about fighter pay because, oh, you should have made this many million, not that many million.
Again, it's just, if you guys remember the whole Francis Ngannou stuff and his relationship with Ariel, this is all like a indirect reference to Ariel Helwani in case you missed it.
That's not where I want to discuss UFC fighter pay. I want to talk about what I'm going to label first contract fighters. So I'm making a move. In 2025, I'm putting up my own money to pay out fighters on UFC cards that do well, that deserve a bit of extra money, and are on their first contract in the UFC. Now, I need to set some ground rules because I have a lot of plans here. I'm talking in an ideal world, if this all works out, I want a point in time in 2025, as late as it can be. I want a point where all of this happens. 10K performance bonuses, 10K fight of the night bonuses, 10K if you're robbed, and 5K for a bad KO loss or a bone break for first contract.
Okay. Anyways, so that's the little clip. You can see that was his plan to take place in 2025. I think he eventually came back and said he changed his mind. I can't remember why, but I just want to show this clip to show the change in his mindset, the change in his state, the change in the way he feels about trying to fix fighter pay, at least at the lower levels. Because you saw in the previous clip, he specifically addressed the 15 and 15 going to 30 and 30 and be like, it's the least of my worries. I don't care anymore because more money is not leading to greater activity or greater results or whatever. But this is the stance from which he came, and then he changed his tune. Now we're going to contrast this with Ariel Helwani's stance. Now, again, I have this quote up here. I care about the fighters. When he talks about fighter pay, he's coming from this viewpoint. We always have to take it with a grain of salt, though, because, we all see it. Obviously, the relationship between Ariel and the UFC is frayed. So we always have to wonder, is there a tinge of bias because of his relationship, because of the things that have happened? And is he really just purely advocating for the fighters, or is he in fact trying to pick at the UFC a little bit because they've tried to damage his reputation, his career so much? The interesting thing would be to really put this question to rest is, you see Ariel being used by Misfit Boxing or some of these other promotions, right, to commentate and go to their events. So the question would be, I wonder if he'll ever criticize those organizations for fighter pay or those types of things that he's so vocal about with the UFC, because then it would show that he's truly coming from an objective stance. And not that I'm saying he needs to, but then that would show, like, yes, he truly is doing it for the sake of the fighters. He doesn't care about maintaining any sort of relationship. He's just simply doing his job. But I don't think he'll do that. And again, I don't begrudge him for that. That's like, why would you, what is it, biting the hand that feeds you, right? Why would you bite the hand that feeds you? In this case, he doesn't have a relationship, so he can speak freely, and it also serves a benefit to the fighters. But I just want to give that as a little, just to bear that in mind as you hear Ariel's thoughts and sentiments when he seems to just steadfastly defend the fighters. There's a little bit more to it. But anyways, let's get into the clip right now. And this clip comes from the show today where he's talking with Michael Chandler about this historic deal. Check it out.
They're saying no more pay-per-view. What's your reaction to that?
I love it. I think it's a win for everybody. I mean, obviously, the immediate knee-jerk reaction that everybody always has when they see 7 years, $7.7 billion is big bad UFC making all this money, and the fighters aren't making any of it, right? When it comes to the pay-per-views, the fans win. The consumers of mixed martial arts win. So as when you were spending over $1,000 a year on your ESPN Plus subscription, plus paying $80 per month for the pay-per-views, and now it just costs you, what is it? Is it $12.99 per month?
Yeah.
Or the basic plan, which I think I heard them talking about it yesterday on some MSNBC Money Business channel, that even if you have the $7.99 cheaper version, you still get to watch it, but you have to watch it with ads. So the barrier to entry, the financial barrier to entry for people that who maybe don't even want to get into the sport. You're a champion in it, and you're a disciple of mixed martial arts and how beautiful this sport is, but they don't want to handcuff themselves to something that's going to cost them over $1,000 a year for an extra entertainment hobby that they have. I think it just brings down the barrier to entry. I think it's great for the consumer. It's great for the fans all around the entire country and the world. And I think ultimately a rising tide raises all ships. And as the money continues to grow in the sport, we're all going to continue to make more and more money.
It's like a bit of, because he raised it himself, right? Like, it's the big bad UFC making all this money. So people are wondering, hey, is that money ever going to trickle down to the fighters? And he kind of talks about it in as positive way as possible without exactly addressing the issue of, hey, our fighters going to get a bump? Should they get a bump, etc. But he just says, hey, rising tide will raise all ships. It's going to be win-win-win for everybody, etc. And it is an interesting question. We're going to dive into the part where Ariel chimes in as well, and he expounds a little bit more. But it is an interesting question because the UFC, unlike the NFL or the NBA, you don't have these different, almost like separate entities competing for the same resources. Here, it's the promotion, which would be like the NBA for basketball. It would be as if the NBA actually owned all of those individual teams and controlled all of them and decided who went where and whatnot, and didn't really care who won, right? Whereas in the NBA, the way it's currently set up, each team wants to win. Each team is driven by their own selfish desires and motivations and whatnot. So we don't have that in the UFC. And because of that, there's not going to be this competition of saying, well, I'll pay you this amount if you come to me. No, well, I'll pay you a little bit more if you come to us. And we can do the calculations of what we can afford to spend on this fighter because we know that will trickle back into our promotion or into our gym or anything. That doesn't exist here. So it is interesting to wonder if fighter pay will substantially go up, or should it go up? Could it go up and they just don't want to raise it because it's like there's still not a strong competitive force in this game, meaning there's not another promotion really that can hang with the UFC and truly offer a big pay raise or kind of make there be a price war, unless that person is a massive star, like somebody like Dakota Ditcheva. She can command a big salary in the PFL because she herself brings in so many numbers. So now she can use that when negotiating, but she's a big star. She's an outlier. For everybody else, it's kind of tricky. Michael Chandler talks a little bit more about this, though, in the next clip, because he said he believes that the UFC eventually will raise fighter pay because he thinks that the UFC actually tries to do the fair thing. I can't comment because, again, I haven't done any research, in-depth research in terms of how payment is structured and what thoughts go into it, what their marketing costs are, et cetera, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So I can't really comment, but that's what Michael Chandler goes on to say. Now we're going to hear that in this next piece of this clip. Check it out.
Okay, so I'm on the record. I said it at the beginning of today's show. Like, I think it's a huge win for Paramount. It makes all the sense in the world. They get this content. They get to own the sport. I also think it's a huge win for the fans. It's much cheaper now to be a fan. The best of the UFC was behind a paywall. Not necessarily the case. If you're an NFL fan, NBA fan, you don't have to pay extra to watch the Super Bowl, NBA Finals. It should be that way as well if you want to be a mainstream sport. So that makes sense. UFC obviously made all this money, highest deal they've ever made. It's like, it's a no-brainer. The one concern for me, if you don't mind me saying, are the fighters, are you guys. And I come from a positive place. You know this, right? Like I care about the fighters and I want you guys to make the most amount of money as possible. And so could I ask, and I know these aren't necessarily, you're not a UFC representative per se, but I appreciate that you're willing to talk about these things. Could I ask, do you think that because now the UFC is making so much more, that will lead to maybe like higher bonuses, 50 to 100, let's just say, or a higher sort of like entry level pay, not 10 and 10, maybe 20. Do you think there'll be a trickle down effect to the fighters because this price tag has been so high?
I do think so. That is my personal opinion, but maybe that's just because of my experience in mixed martial arts. All right. A lot of people, if you don't know my career, I fought outside the UFC for the majority of my career. I will never fight inside the UFC as long as I fought outside of the UFC. So I understand both sides of the coin, and I have had nothing but a very, very positive experience thus far with the UFC. And I make really great money. I am taking care of my family. And I do know, Ariel, that you are an advocate for the fighters. I do know that you care about us. You care about the sport. You want to see all of us taken care of, not just the big promoter, but the fighters as well and the fans. I think all that stuff is on the table. I'm not going to sit here and go on record saying that the UFC should do this, but it would make sense if maybe some bonuses went up or the overall money went up. But you can't have those conversations until big storylines like this hit, big headlines like this hit, where you're talking about $7.7 billion. And I think it's just a testament to how big the UFC has grown. And now I think not only have we gotten to this point, but now being on CBS and Paramount and the barrier to entry is much smaller. Plus, you're talking about a fight at the White House. You're talking about these huge events. Can you imagine a fight at the White House on CBS where everybody in the entire country has access to it because it's on CBS? It just grows the sport. And ultimately, as the sport grows, the money will continue to catch up. And I will say, there's a lot more money happening inside of the UFC and the sport of mixed martial arts than the UFC will ever gloat about, than the UFC will ever brag about. And that's just the way that they like it. That's how they like to run their business. But I think a lot of us are doing.
I think what he's saying there, if it's a little unclear, I think what he was trying to say is he's saying there's a lot more money inside the UFC or something that they'll gloat about. I think what he's trying to say is they actually pay the fighters a lot more than just what's listed in the base payments or the bonuses or whatever. And they take care of their fighters. It's just not always made public. I think that's what he's getting at there. And that very well may be the case. You know, as he was talking, I was thinking about this a little bit more because you don't have those typical market forces like you would inherently with different NHL teams or NBA teams trying to compete for the same players and those same resources. But there is an incentive for the UFC to raise base pay. There's a couple incentives, actually. So number one, for public appearances, if they went across the board and they bumped baseline salaries, right? Instead of 15 and 15 to 20 and 20 or 25 and 25, something like that, right? If they did that across the board and they kind of made these stair-step adjustments that are for these things that are like super public, the fans would be happy. I guarantee you. So that would be good PR, good press in general for the sport. So I do think there's incentive there. The other reason that the UFC might be incentivized to raise those base salaries, like imagine if they raise it to 30 and 30, that means you can get 60 grand in your first debut fight, which is a far cry from what you can make on the regional scene in most of these promotions. I don't know how far of a cry it is from the PFL or these other organizations, but it'd be like a big jump that you could potentially make 60 grand in a fight compared to like 5 grand for main eventing at a regional promotion. What that would do in the long term, not in the short term, but in the long term, is it would make mixed martial arts or the UFC a much more attractive option compared to going into the NBA or the NFL or whatnot. And where this would pay dividends is for the larger weight classes. So one of the things that Justin has said is normally the bigger athletes, the taller athletes, the stronger athletes, they're thinking NBA or NFL because you go in a minimum annual salary of like 800,000 or 900,000 per year. Even if you're only around for a few years in the league, you get health insurance, you get these different benefits that may not exist in the UFC. But now if you start to raise the base pay, I mean, imagine if I don't know if it'll go to this, but imagine if they go to 50 and 50. right? And so now you're coming in making 100K potentially per fight, get 2 or 3 fights in that year. Now we're in a totally different territory where we're actually saying, okay, yeah, maybe I can get into the NBA or NFL, but I'm probably going to only have a couple years there, and I don't even know if I'll last. But instead, now the UFC is a much more attractive option where I can be more competitive. Even if I'm not a champ, I can stick around, get my contract up to a certain level, and still be making multiple hundreds of thousands per year for like a 10-year career, whatever it may be. So now we're actually raising the bar for the entire sport as a whole, also for fans, also for the brand, etc. So that could be one interesting piece of that incentive equation that we haven't considered, and that could maybe motivate the UFC to do some sort of like across the board bump. That'd be cool. I'd like to see it. I just want to see the sport keep improving and getting better and growing. And of course, keeping the fighters happy. They're the most important part of the entire equation. And I think that ultimately, sometimes the UFC, just as Michael Chandler said, he said, oh, it's a big bad UFC. That's how people look at it. I don't know if that's necessarily, if they're always just trying to, you know what I mean? They get painted with this narrative like they're always trying to just rip the fighters off and get them to fight for as little as possible. I don't know if that's necessarily even true. I wouldn't be shocked if the UFC brass themselves, they want everybody to make more money, including the employees, including the fighters, including the staff, etc. And they want everybody to rise up. They're not necessarily sitting at the top and just trying to keep all the profits for themselves, for like a subset of the board of directors or whatever. I imagine they want everybody on the team to win, I would believe. So I think there could be some motivation either from just wanting everybody to win and share in that win of this new contract, plus increase the level of talent. So I don't know. I think this could go down this way. But anyways, that's the end of the video. That's what I wanted to share and contrast these two different perspectives. MMA Guru stands very interesting. Like I said, it was almost a little surprised to hear him go off the way he did. And it's also interesting to contrast that what he said like just a year and a half ago. And then here's Ariel's stance, which I think we could have all predicted from the get-go. This is going to be his area of concern and what he wanted to talk about. We shall see how it unfolds. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining. Hit that like button if you did like the video and let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.